I guess now I'll get a little bit started. My name's Tim Buckingham, as you can see. Currently, I'm a master's candidate here. My concentration is a little unclear, but mostly it's focusing on the technology aspect. My end goal is to be involved with digitization projects, and OCR is pretty much that first step in the door. Before coming here, I actually worked at the Perseus project, where they did a lot of OCRing at the early stages to get a lot of their documents online. Perseus is a digital classical library. I will sign in. Where they basically took open source copies of ancient Greek texts, Greek and Latin texts, and made them publicly available for everybody. So I managed some of the support OCR workflow for some of the, mostly we had undergrads doing it, but that was kind of a one-shot deal when we were expanding it again, but mostly the scanning was done before. So I am hoping today to give a very introductory course in OCR. This is meant to be a kind of broad spectrum overview, working through the goals. Ideally, I want you to come out of this familiar with OCR and some terms surrounding making machine actionable text out of images. I want you to be aware of the kind of software. You're going to lose a brick.
I know, that's fine.
I want you to be aware of the kind of software that's currently available and the stuff that's being used right now for these digitization projects. And hopefully, we're going to get a little bit of first-hand experience actually trying to scan and OCR some documents. I know on the sign I mentioned bringing stuff. I know you brought something, just to make me mad. It's all handwriting. But did you guys bring things, or did you want to bring things? It's fine. I have some demos. We can go through what they are. There's some breadth to them. The different kinds of text that you would want to OCR. All it's typed. Some of it is much older, and some of it is much newer. So hopefully we should get some interesting results working through them. I actually brought 3, so if you 3 want to handle those, then that'll actually work perfectly. We also do have some document boxes from the archive lab, the archives lab class, which used to meet in here, and has a lot of primary source documents, which are the sort of thing that I would really push for digitizing. So we have some stuff to play with when we get to that stage. So to begin with, we're going to start at the beginning. OCR is actually a very old technology, which is not something I was completely aware of. The first OCRing machines were sort of designed in the late 19th century, and with everyone's favorite 19th century technology, the photovoltaic cell, using that to recognize light as it bounced off of paper and then send a small electrical signal through a machine. This is actually an early patent for one. This one looks like it only deals with numbers, but it's interesting to me that you can replicate these processes digitally on a very mechanical level, and I find that fascinating. But working forward, the original use cases were things like machines for readers for the blind, also Morse code translators, which is an interesting idea where you could run a bit of text through a machine and it would translate it into Morse code. As time went on, they started to expand the use cases and got us the modern barcode scanner, which was basically ubiquitous by the late 20th century. And around that time, you started getting digital imaging technology, which then made the opportunity present itself for creating digital OCR technology, which was based in that kind of software. So working through talking about OCR and talking about the workflow that we're going to talk about here, there's going to be a really important key phrase, and that's machine actionable. So when presenting people the idea behind digitization projects, a lot of times they go, oh, I'm just going to scan it and create like an image and then I'll have it and it's digitized. That information is not digitized. You've just captured an image of the document. You've captured an image of the letter. It's technically a digital record, but it's not machine actionable. And so what machine actionable means is that the data and the information content can be accessed by a machine, in this case a computer. So if you don't have that text in that image coded as such, then you might as well just have a picture of a dinosaur. You might as well have a picture of anything. It doesn't really make a strong difference. And so getting those documents to be readable by machines is the primary purpose of what's going on here. And if anyone has any questions at any point or wants to say anything, feel free to interrupt me. I prefer a more open workshop style where we can talk. And if you want to derail me completely, I'm incredibly susceptible to that, so go for it. So there's a certain argument within talking about data structure with machine actionability, where just raw text might not be considered machine actionable enough, even though it's a string that you could parse. Structured data is sort of my preferred output, so something built in a markdown language, so XML is sort of the thing I'm most familiar with, but you could even go with standard markdown or even HTML. Those sorts of languages will structure what you're actually looking at, which will make it so much easier for a machine to read through it and find what it's trying to find. And the more structured your data is, the more accessible it is to computation, the closer we get to really useful digital records. So far, so good? So, talking about uses within library science. There's 3 target groups that I feel that this technology should people in these 3 groups who should become more familiar with these technologies. The first is archivists. As we can see with the archives lab materials, there's a glut of paper documentation. It has informational content, but so much of that content is just locked behind the practical wall of not being able to read 100,000 letters. Excuse me. Digitizing those documents and creating versions of them that machines can parse makes that information accessible. It means that you can query a corpus of letters and ask for, love letters or short poems or, anyone who was writing from this particular battle during the Civil War. Any kind of big scale questions that you can ask. By making those objects machine actionable, you make that information queryable. And that is crucial as we move into the digital age, and getting the right infrastructure in place for processing that huge amount of data is going to be more and more important as we produce more and more records. The other group is the digital librarians, who I used to count myself a member of and might hopefully one day again count myself a member of, creating digital versions of book documentation, taking physical books and converting them into online digital versions. These are important things that work as we become more and more decentralized, and the physical book, I'm not going to say is going to die, because I think the physical book will be around forever, but people will be using non-physical access points for a lot of their information needs. The third, which I also am in that category, is just amateurs with primary source documents. Amateurs who have personal papers collections. I have 2 personal paper collections that have fallen on me, and a third that will happen eventually. The first is a collection from my grandmother, who she got from her great-grandmother when she researched to try and become a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, so she has a lot of documentation about our family genealogy. She was not allowed, because while she did find 1 ancestor who fought for the revolution, she found 3 that fought for the Tories, so she wasn't allowed in. She was a little upset about that. Also, cookbooks. I have piles of cookbooks that, as the only one in the family who still bakes things or makes things, they've all found their way to me. And the third is from the other half of the family, which has its own big piles of historical documentation. The problem there is with those documents, there's kind of a fight over who should have them. Creating digital versions of them is useful within the family structure for giving everyone the ability to access the records, but it's also a preservation thing. It also allows us to donate anything of historical value to local historical societies, which is part of the project I was working on last summer, was getting some stuff into local historical societies where my family's from. Creating digital versions of those records is really helpful for allowing the family who has the sentimental attachment to keep the personal record while the information content isn't lost in the basement somewhere. So I do think it's important that we, as information science professionals, make this service available to people so that they understand that it exists. And so it's helpful for them. Anyway, give that broad spiel about why you should care. Let's talk about some of the software. So the first, the Old Faithful, is the Abby Fine Reader. It was one of the first major companies to push out digital OCR technology, and this was in the late 80s. It's actually a Russian company, and I didn't know this. I thought Abby was sort of just a misspelling of the name. It's actually a transliteration of a Proto-Hmong word, meaning keen eye, which is preserved in their branding, as you can see. But they are a very interesting company. They reached their heyday in the mid-2000s. But they, from day one, had a strong focus on the conversion of paper documentation into digital documentation. They sort of thought about this as, there's going to be a problem where we have tons and tons and tons of documents, and they need to exist digitally because that makes them useful. And so from day one, that was their mission statement. And in 2005, when FineReader 8 was put out, FineReader 8 was one of the best OCR services that had been released to that point. And it coincided with that early booming of the internet, that sort of golden age of internet pirate cowboy land, which led to a lot of online digital projects. Project Gutenberg got its start there, and it was using FineReader. Perseus got its start then, and it was using FineReader, or it got its online version started then. And so it jump-started a wide online movement to create these digital records and these digital documents. And for the better part of the decade and a half, back even into the 90s, they had the market cornered. And then, oh, sorry, I went through the pros and cons already. Mostly, yes. Sorry, I thought the next slide, wrong slide. But this is an important pro here. Because of that widespread use through multiple organizations, there's tons of documentation out there about how to use Abby FineReader for less than technologically perfect people. Tech literacy is obviously something that's always a bit of a problem when you're working in a field like this, and so having lots of documentation is pretty helpful. One of the potential issues is that since Abby isn't as prominent as it used to be, it's actually less common. Simmons has a copy, which I was actually surprised to find. I think they're running 11 or 12, I'm not really sure. They don't have 14, which is the newest one. But since it isn't as much of a universal standard as it used to be, there's not as much love. However, if you're working with an older institution or an institution that had an existing OCRing project, if they were doing this kind of stuff 10 years ago, they were using Abby, and they probably have internal documentation on how to use it and an internal workflow. And it's always going to be easier to build off of existing stuff rather than move on to something else. Anyway, Abby had the market cornered for around a decade until Tesseract jumped on the scene. Tesseract had actually been around for a while as an internal OCRing software for HP, but then HP went under. And so Tesseract broke off and became its own project, an open source project. That was in 2005. About a year and a half later, Google bought them because they were doing such a great job. It's an open source program, and it is actually the back end there's an OCR service built into Google Drive. I don't know if anyone has ever used that. It doesn't work amazingly well, but it is built on parts of Tesseract. And the Google Books project, the backbone of it, is actually Tesseract based. That doesn't I have my own problems with Google Books. Mostly it's extracting metadata from those OCR documents, which is kind of a problem. But in terms of actually making OCR versions of scanned things, Google Books has done a pretty good job. And that's why I like that HathiTrust is building on Google Books. Anyway.
Is DOS-based the standard, or
So that's a good question. It's not, so Tesseract was originally DOS-based. Now it is specifically just run from the command prompt. It has no GUI at all. Because it's open source, I was going to get into this in my pros and cons,
Okay.
but because it's open source, no, it's a great question. Because it's open source, there are people who have built personal GUIs. There's a man I know, a professor, his name's Bruce Robertson, that's his name. He's doing a OCR project I think he's up in Nova Scotia, I can't remember, I've only met him a couple times. But he's scanning old Byzantine manuscripts, and he basically wrote a GUI to go with Tesseract so that his students could work with a visual interface while working with Tesseract. But
so are they proprietary, the GUIs that are out there?
I'm not actually sure. I have no idea. I don't strongly know. I was going to build Tesseract as a central focus on this workshop, but then I realized getting it installed on the machines here would be a problem, and since I wasn't going to try and fight for that, I didn't do as much work into it. I apologize for that, but it's a good instinct, and those are good questions, because if you want to actually be doing this work at the highest end right now, Tesseract is the name of the game. Harvard's about to start I don't actually know how much I'm saying this. Harvard's about to start a digitization project, a new one over the summer, and they're specifically looking for people who have an information science background, an interest in technology, an interest in rare books, and familiarity with Tesseract. So they're shifting their workflow over to a Tesseract-based workflow. So Tesseract is the name of the game right now. Yeah. In terms of the pros and the cons, it's basically the pros and cons you get with any open source software, where there's a lot of power if you're willing to put the time and energy into learning how to get the power out of it. But if you aren't, it's kind of scary and daunting, and maybe not necessarily a perfect system for you if it doesn't come with everything you need prepackaged. Questions so far? Comments? We can move on to our third one, which is actually kind of a bit of a letdown. Adobe Acrobat actually has a built-in OCR, which I didn't know, and will actually end up being the one that we're using because it's so simple. But essentially what happened, at least by my understanding of reading sort of the history of the process, in making a good PDF reader, they slowly decided to roll out OCR capability for that, and then it became just a matter of how do we find a way to export this in a meaningful way, and then they were done. It's kind of interesting. I think, I was sort of surprised, but looking at it, coming out the other way, other end, it's actually really good if you're working with a smaller project or a smaller institution. Most institutions will have access to the Adobe Suite. Most people who aren't necessarily, super big tech people will have brand recognition there, and it's a lot easier to get people who aren't particularly tech savvy or a little out of their comfort zone to learn a tool that they already kind of know and learn how to use it better. That's been my personal experience. Again, maybe that makes me cynical, but I tend to think that if there's sort of a fear of pointy brackets when it comes to computer stuff, and especially if you're talking out of the humanities or out of more of a social soft science area, and so giving them the familiar is very nice, working forward from there. One of the other bigger problems with OCR, or with Adobe Acrobat, is because it's kind of a weaker tool, there isn't a lot of customization and flexibility. It can recognize multiple languages and has sort of a breadth of possible things it'll pick up on, but you don't have as much control over that as you would with something like Tesseract or Abifine. Also, the OCR functionality is not really Adobe's #1 thing that they're working on right now. So if there are bugs or potential problems, it's not necessarily going to be something that gets fixed quickly, which is a bit of a potential issue. So that was sort of the quick and dirty on the introduction. Now we get to the part where we start playing with stuff. So, a couple of things. There is a box of documents there if you feel like you want to work with that, but I do have my documents that I brought, which I felt might be fun. Okay, so the first is actually on the poster. It's the first page of the Bay Psalm book, which has come up in my life a couple of times lately, so I decided to just kind of lean into it. It's the first book published in the New World, or printed in the New World, so to speak. So it is actually typeset, which is ideal for this kind of technology. Specifically, avoiding script is probably a good idea at this stage. You can work with script, and in fact, Tesseract is really good for that because you can sort of customize its base. Because you can edit basically you can edit the back-end stuff that it uses to recognize characters on your own, so you can actually start teaching it to recognize the handwriting of the person that you're working with. I was working on a 15th century? Yeah, a 15th century Latin legal manuscript while I was at Tufts, and we were having everyone do the encoding by hand, and basically went to the library and worked with a librarian who worked on the Tesseract workflow for it, and after a couple of iterations of working through, he managed to get it to be able to recognize most of the standard characters. It was still having a problem with ligatures, which is a huge issue, but it was definitely very helpful after that stage. We still had the students do everything by hand because we wanted them to get their practice sort of reading the manuscript and also working on their Latin, but it was amazing to me to watch someone sort of work around with it a little bit and actually get something meaningful like that out of it. Anyway, based on the book, this is a dummy birth certificate. These are the sorts of documents that I think archivists should be digitizing. Things that exist in paper format. Formal sort of official government kind of stuff. These would be easy to scan, they're regular, they're printed. more often than not, this one has typeface on it. This is not a real person, by the way. It's just a fake dummy Indiana birth certificate from 2008. The last is a snickerdoodle recipe, because I want a digital copy of a snickerdoodle recipe. Just because. Creating digital records of recipes is actually kind of interesting. I'm thinking somewhere in the back of my mind there might be a way to ingest them in a way that would let you like play with the numbers, or maybe do a sort of, this is what I have in my cabinet, what do I get to make today kind of thing. But yeah, those are sort of, that's what I've got up as examples. Yes.
So playing with the numbers, so I've got a recipe that cooks for 6 and I want to cut it down to 2?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
That kind of thing. But on my end, instead of on like all recipes or whatever on my client.
Right.
Yeah, I want to do it on my end. I don't want your ads. And I want to do it with my grandmother's,
Handwritten 3x5 card?
Well, it'll stop being a handwritten 3x5 card once it is a digital document. But essentially, I want to take that recipe and go, oh, okay, let me modify that. I don't need 48 chocolate chip cookies, Grandma. Like, come on.
Right.
I'm not trying to eat all that. But yeah, so you guys can pick from it. Also, I don't know what's in these archival boxes. If you want to go digging for something, that's fine. We only have one scanner, so we can only kind of go one at a time. The way I'm imagining this going is we will create scans over on this machine, and you will either, with a flash drive or emailing it to yourself, get them off, and then you can use some of these machines in the back, which will actually have Adobe running on them, and you can work on the workflow through there. Also, if anyone wants to experiment with Abby, it is on the machines, and you can try and do it, but I cannot trust you that it will work every time, because every live demo goes horribly awry, because that's the way live demos work. But the Adobe one is pretty locked. But yeah, so...
Are all 3 of these programs Mac and Windows?
Tesseract prefers Linux more than anything else, but yeah, they're compatible Mac and Windows. Yeah, especially the newer versions. I don't know if Abby Find 8 is Mac compliant, but the new ones are. Yeah. Great. Questions, comments, concerns?
Are there any others above and beyond these 3, or these really?
These are the big ones, mostly because of the history, the current winner, and the universality. Adobe is everywhere. Abby used to be everywhere and used to be really big, and Tesseract is very popular right now. There are probably other technologies, but those are the 3 you're most likely to actually encounter in the world. Yeah. Any other thoughts and or questions? Do you want to grab something and scan it?
Yeah.
Will, I kind of want you to go later because I want to see how it responds to your handwriting. Yeah. Will and I were talking earlier, and he has because you have an interesting use case that you were actually thinking about. If you feel like sharing that.
Well, I would be happy to share. So the reason I saw this poster, and besides the fact that I know Tim and wanted to go, I was like, oh, I could. I have like a trail journal that I kept while hiking a trail, and it's very long, and I don't want to have to type the whole thing out. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could just, do this and get the text from it so that I could.
Since we were talking about trails and through hiking at another point in our lives, which trail was this from?
This was from the Pacific Northwest Trail.
Okay.
So it's a useful thing because it's like a trail that not many people have done. So if you could, rather than just digitizing my trail journal and expecting everyone to read my handwriting, so there's useful information for them, it would be better if I could, put it in a WordPress or something. Because at this point, it's something that people would find. Have good information.
So yeah, he's got an actual use case for it, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And
But we'll see if we get there.
Yeah, we'll see what it does with his handwriting. Yeah. So, would anyone like to go first? No? Yes. Do you want to go first, Joanna?
I don't know, I'm here and I'm standing.
Which one do you have a preferred? Oh yes, you want to do the, what is that actually?
I am super curious about this. It is file number 201, not to be removed from the speaker. Army Medical Center, it looks like it's a memo. For your information, you are advised that under authority contained in first endorsement, Office of the Surgeon General, dated 1938.
Well, there you go.
Yes, and I'm curious because it has this so it has this section, which is just typed, this section which looks like old typewriter font, but some of it is overlapped. Because what they used to do with typewriters is, like, if they made an error, they just, like, wrote over it. This used to be a 2, and now it's a 1, for example. This is a dot, it's weird.
Oh.
But, in addition to this, it has a handwritten section on the bottom.
All
And
sorts of stuff.
I'm just
Yeah,
curious
this is
to
a very
see-
cool
yeah,
document.
Yeah, I found it in that box,
Great.
Yeah,
so I'm super.
alright, cool, yeah, let's take a look. Let's see how it works.
Should we gather around or
You
observe
can,
from
yeah,
a
you
distance?
can gather around.
Okay, I
You
wanna
get
see
up.
how, I wanna
So there's
see
a
how
couple
this-
other things moving forward. By the way, now we are on the scan slide, in case you're wondering. I also have a little handout here, if you'd be inclined. These are some standard techniques for how you might improve your scan, and a couple of key terms surrounding how you might improve it. The general rule is always black and white. Try to keep everything as on angle as possible so that the machine can sort of read them as individual lines, and reduce saturation as much as possible. So this will be a problem because I've done it with this before. This creates some interesting errors, but
Because of the
Be-
yellowness in the
because of the
background?
yellowness, because of things like, you know, this is obviously just a scan of this page already, but because of things like this crease, this seam right here, because of sort of, you can see the edge of the book here, it'll try and grab that. You can sort of crop the image and have it just focus there, which is something that is recommended, I think that's on there, where you actually import the image as a scanned image, like a JPEG or a PNG file or something, and then do some editing to it to like get everything to line up and crop off the edges, and then run it through. And all of these will process, we're working just with PDF because it's easier and more direct, but all of these will process just standard image files if you want to process those as well. Tesseract, I know, really just loves TIFFs and just loves eating TIFFs for breakfast. So that works pretty nicely.
So when you scan the thing in,
Mm-hmm.
it's OCR'd,
Mm-hmm.
if that's the phrase.
Yes.
What is the output that it'll give you?
The output.
Yeah.
So,
Because I would imagine with all the errors that might happen, you would have to edit that.
So, Adobe will actually output a actionable PDF, which will allow you to grab the text in the scanned image and sort of change it. And it's kind of interesting because it'll populate with what it thinks the font should look like, which is kind of fun. But you can also export it as a docx file or any kind of rich text. Here's some more information on that. You can export it as a rich text document. You can, in theory, you should be able to do an XL or a CSV. I have not tried this, and I don't know how it, if it just reads the cells or something. I'm really not sure what it does moving forward to get that kind of raw output. But yeah. So, you want to try it out?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's see. Let's see how it works. And then.
So you have opened
Yes, I've
Adobe
already,
Acrobat.
so yeah, I've opened Adobe Acrobat and
Adobe Acrobat Pro.
yeah, oh, now my brain doesn't remember.
Does it have to be pro?
I think so.
For what it's worth, Adobe is on all of the school pages.
Yeah, here we go. I did this morning, and I actually.
That's okay.
But I didn't do it downstairs, which might actually be the problem. There we go.
So you're going to
Create
file.
yeah, file, create PDF from scanner.
Okay.
And so when you're doing this direct scan, you know, in Adobe Acrobat, there's actually a toggle that'll just say, I want you to start OCRing this. In theory, I could turn that off, and then I could go in and run it sort of from the file menu and say, hey, by the way, here's this flat PDF, I want you to make it something cooler. So you can do that once it's actually just a flat PDF. Yeah, so you could do it that way, but this way will work a little bit faster. There we go. Okay, so if you come in now, it has actually attempted to OCR this document. So if you see all of these individual boxes, so first of all, right here, text has been recognized as English. A lot of OCRing is about actually knowing the right language and getting the machine to recognize the language. So it knows that it's grabbed English, and all of these individual boxes are actually an attempt to grab the individual language. So right now, so let's see what happens if I try all of those. Yeah. So it does do some interesting things with formatting, obviously you can tell, as you start to move things around. But I should be able to just type whatever I want and see it's trying to imitate the,
That's so interesting.
it's trying to imitate the font.
Oh.
So it's automatically generating a
Wow.
font based on recognizing the individual characters and sort of mapping them to what it thinks they ought to look like.
So I can turn anything into a font.
Yes, that is one of the things that this is for. You can turn your handwriting into a font. You can turn,
Whoa.
yes, you
okay.
just have to teach it to recognize the characters. And this is why handwriting is so hard, because what this basically did was it went through every little weird dark splotch on this and went, what letter does this look like? And compared it to everything that it has in its database. And that's not just every English character, that's not just everything on the keyboard, that's in every language that it has a Unicode compliant interface for.
Yeah.
And it went through and found all of the characters it likes, figured out it was English, so it threw out all the non-English ones for its character recognition, and then went through.
That's really
Now, what you'll see is that there's also some spell check going on here. We've got some red squiggles. Part of that might be that it might not know the word snickerdoodle, but part of it is also that sometimes when it's trying to recognize a character, it will actually, the classic example is, like I'm sure the two F's in coffee, it has no idea what that's supposed to be. And is very confused, and I'll be interested to see what letter it thinks it is.
If you try to delete it, is it a single character?
Yep.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I want to know what that character actually is. So the way you can actually export it, and you can export to Microsoft Word. And so I'm just going to call it snickerdoodles, and I'm going to keep it in the downloads because that's fine. And it's going to process the document, and then it's going to open it in Word, and it is going to look interesting. So, oh, no, here we go. Yeah, so it's going to use Word. So Word didn't generate the custom font, right? So Word just sort of decided on one of its own fonts. Let's see if we can zoom this in so that we can get it.
But it still looks like your original output.
It definitely looks very similar, but if you actually zoom in, you can really start to see
Yeah.
some of the problems. You can start to see why it thinks like slockerdoggle. It thinks that's a snickerdoodle, or yolkerdoodle over here, right? So where was coffee? Yeah, so
Corey.
coffee was Corey. Which
But it's
is
funny that
interesting.
this word has two R's.
Right, but then you can look at, so with the word cake, instead of reading the K, it read it as an L and an R.
So it still sucks.
So it sucks, but it's better than nothing in many cases, because if you've got a lot. The other thing is that what's really nice about this is that the machine isn't really likely to make the kinds of errors that a human would. The machine isn't going to use the wrong word, it isn't going to misplace a vowel, it's not going to make the kinds of typos that humans do, it's going to make the kinds of typos that machines do, which is thinking K as L and R. No human is ever going to think K as L and R. So it's sort of like the kinds of correction that humans are really good at complements the thing that the machine is really bad at. And the kinds of things the machine is really good at complements the things that the humans are really bad at in terms of transcription. So if you use it as a twofold editing process, you're actually much more likely to get a very consistent and accurate output. They sort of complement each other in that way. But it does sort of require a little bit of manual effort. The nice thing is, though, that the errors do kind of jump out at you as being really obvious errors.
So is there a way, I imagine there isn't with Acrobat, but say like I had 500 of these recipes written in that same typeface.
Sure.
Is there some way with one of these softwares that I'm like,
That's right.
yeah,
Where-
I can
where-
be like,
where you
listen,
can-
this weird
This weird thing?
like this,
Yeah,
every time you
that's
see this, just
Yeah.
please do double F.
Yes.
Can
That's
I,
right.
you can teach
Yes,
it.
You can teach that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, but not with Acrobat.
Not with Acrobat, because Acrobat doesn't, the reference material that Acrobat uses to recognize characters is locked off in their own software. And that's true with AbiFine too. Tesseract opens that up for you. Everything's on GitHub. It just hosts their whole like list of where everything is, so you can actually just sort of look at its character references if you really wanted to, but on your personal end you can sort of implement things. I know that the guy, Bruce Robertson, that I mentioned before, I keep calling him the guy, that's kind of weird. Bruce Robertson, he used his custom GUI that he made to provide feedback, where basically every time you made a correction to the text, it would prompt to say, do you want to feed this back? And so you could prompt it. So the big thing, again, he was working with Byzantine Greek, which is, I don't know, but it's the point where they start using lowercase letters, and they start using subscripts, and they start using accent marks and diacriticals, all of which are really, really important if you're trying to actually parse the language, but the machine has a really hard time seeing those things, and it doesn't think that they're important and just throws them out. So even if it's programmed to look for ancient Greek, if something has an iota subscript, it's just going to go, that's an eta, I don't care that it has an iota subscript. Whereas that iota subscript is crucial if you're actually trying to understand what the word is. So that feedback loop was mostly for recognizing diacriticals and those sort of things. But Tesseract can do that, does have that sort of functionality. But again, it's like I mentioned, Tesseract is really, really powerful if you have the skill and the time to put into working with it. Adobe is, in my mind, one of the better amateur ones. If you don't have a lot of time and want like a closed package where you can't actually get inside it, it works nicely for giving you something. Like if I was doing recipes, for example, like this, I'd probably be going with Adobe, if it makes sense. If I was doing like, textbooks, plenty of people do it with textbooks. They'll create scans of textbooks, and then they'll turn the textbooks into text, and then you can get like a little speak and spell kind of auto player, and you can just listen to your textbooks, which is a pretty common OCR use. Yeah, you can do that with Adobe, pretty nice. But yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't get the scanner to work, which definitely would have been half the fun. I really would want to see what happened with Johanna's document. But if you guys have any questions, I would be happy to take them while I try to get the scanner to work. Or you can go about your lives. Yeah, you can press buttons if you want. Yeah, you want to play with this? Sure, go for it. Yeah.
Anyone else want to press buttons?
Yeah,
If you press buttons.
So, if you want, you can close out of Word and actually go into Adobe, and then you can do a lot more. Yeah.
Runes neurolog.
Yeah,
Huh. Interesting.
it will do that.
I just had transcription of vocal stuff done.
Yeah.
And I wondered after I'd done it whether it took more time for me to go through what the computer thought
Yeah.
the person was saying. There was one woman from the Midwest who I interviewed who was very slow and distinct, and I loved her.
Yeah, exactly.
All really good. And then there were these two, there was me, a New York chick, and another New York chick, and it was like, ah, and the computer knew not what to do with it. So
It's a similar kind of thing.
it's still not there yet. The technology isn't.
It's just
isn't
not
that
there
cool.
yet. But it's getting better, and particularly so my personal feeling is that these sort of open source feedback projects are a really good place for that, because you can get so much data about what it's doing right and what it's doing wrong, and they'll respond to it, right? They'll get back to it.
Because they want to make it better.
They want to make it better. Well, they want to make it better so that they can use Google Books to take over the world. But like, they do want to make it better, and it's a very, I think it's a very good culture for participating in that. The Tesseract support forums are all over the place for individual projects. You know, Bruce Robertson, the guy I keep talking about, who was one of the people I talked about OCR with a lot before. You know, he's not alone. He's one classics professor in Nova Scotia who's doing this stuff by himself, but there's an online community that was helping him and supported him in this sort of project endeavor. So there's a lot of room for growth, and they know that, but they're working to improve it.
Where can I learn about how to use Tesseract?
So all of Tesseract's documentation is actually on GitHub. I was actually working my way through it earlier today because I was going to try and get it up and running on my personal machine to see if we could get some time playing with it, but the Windows support is not fantastic. Again, it prefers Linux to everything. But yeah, it's all on GitHub, and there's lots of documentation on GitHub. They like to really, really talk about themselves and to talk about their support. And also, They don't have, as far as I can tell, they don't have a proper website. They just use their GitHub pages documentation, which is really good. Is everyone familiar with GitHub? I keep dropping that around, but yeah, it's just a place where you can share software and programming code and whatever else you want to do. Yeah, you should. So you should also be able to grab it like a text box and move it.
There we go.
Yeah, you should be able to reshape it, similar to how text boxes work in Visual.
Not to dwell too much on the font, but
Yeah,
this
no,
is-
that's definitely a personal thing.
This is something that I'm thinking about. So I used to run this like zine at my college,
Mhm.
and it was super funky, and it was mostly poetry.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking like, wouldn't it have been cool if
If you made a font for your handwriting.
I could make a font for the handwriting of the people who submitted,
Yeah.
and like in the like author bylines, I could like write it in that font that's the
Yeah.
font. Like, so is that a thing that you can?
It's definitely doable, and this is the technology that is the first step for doing it.
So with
fully-
this though, I can't take this font that's in Adobe right now and copy it to Word because it's not
No,
it's not a
because it won't
font
be
yet.
supported by Word.
It's just
Custom fonts, oh man, that's something I should look into. I know vaguely the workflow for it, but not specifically. I do believe you need more specific software for it. I want to say you can actually do it with Photoshop, but I don't actually.
that's right. Okay.
But yeah, it's about basically creating the back end for the font recognition. So,
Yeah.
and it starts with making a really small personal image
Uh-huh.
for the item, and then getting a collection of those and mapping them all to the text inputs.
Okay. So
it
you
is
need
it is doable.
in the larger body you have,
Yeah.
better I assume it is. Kind of
And the-
like if it only has like one of my R's to look at, it's not gonna make an R that really looks to me like it's my R. Like
so
if,
that-
but if I
that's
give
why-
it 500, then
So that's why I suggested. I get what you're saying. If you wanted to like automatically create the font, you would have to seed it a lot of data.
yeah.
Yes, but I don't currently believe that there's sort of an automatic font generation. There might be something, but I'm not aware of it off the top of my
Oh,
head.
that's interesting. Okay.
It would be, you'd have to do it pretty manually.
But isn't it automatically generating font once you type it?
No, it's recognizing it by comparing it to another font. It's not necessarily, well, actually.
But I mean, with
it
this
kind
when
of is
we
automated.
type
Yeah.
it generates
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
How does it do?
I guess
How do
that's
it
true.
now?
I guess that's true. I guess it is kind of automatically generating it.
How do it
Yeah, how do it know?
I mean, I don't know, but
Sure.
but it's not exactly like directly on the topic.
No, it's fine, because it's a good use case, and I do think that it's actually a thing for it.
I see why I didn't like measuring, because it's on
Yeah,
two
'cause
lines
it's
there,
two lines,
sevens.
yeah. Are you trying to correct all the red?
I am having a great time like editing it here and then
Seeing what it looks like,
change.
seeing what it looks like in the Word document?
Yeah, so I did this and
Wow.
then I thought I.
So if you tack it at the original level,
So my general opinion is to always tackle it at the level you want the final document. So a lot of the work that I've done was about creating XML documents out of the scans, and so, yes,
Yeah.
that is true.
so
I
then you're
also-
inserting code into the output, pardon me for interrupting.
I would basically be doing this, and then I would output it as text, and then I would convert that text into raw text, sort of like what it looks like there, and then I would start marking it up
Yep.
with XML brackets and things, okay? And so again, most of this was me managing a workflow for undergraduates. They had a pre-existing XML structure, and it was just about inserting their text where it needed to be. They were actually going word by word, which was particularly interesting, but, yeah. So it took them a long time. They only did maybe like 2.
You mean there was like a tag for each word?
Yes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Why?
Because the way that the final deliverable looked, it would take a picture of the object, and then it would highlight, as you selected words in the transcription, it would highlight and zoom in on them so that you could actually take a look at it during.
Wow.
It was a cool deliverable, it was a cool project.
That's really neat.
Yeah, I could show it to you sometime, but I don't want to do it now on YouTube because it's technically a person's project.
I'm really impressed that it knew what 1/2 was.
Right? Yeah, there's
Yeah.
some things
I mean,
there
there's some
that,
things that it
Yeah.
really gets.
yeah, it got all of those measurements correct.
So, any other questions?
And no ligatures either, that I
Yeah.
can see.
Yeah,
compared to, back when pterodactyls were flying, I worked for a lawyer who gave me a big piece of text that I had to scan and use OCR on. And all of this weird crap came from
Yeah.
God only knows where.
It's gotten better. I mean, I don't know, your hyperbolic thing about pterodactyls, I'm not sure how long ago.
90s.
90s? Yeah, so it's gotten a lot better since the 90s. Particularly, basically from 2005 on, it got significantly better once it started using a lot of Unicode standards for character recognition. And again, it still produces errors. I'm actually really happy with the way this one turned out in the Word document. It came out really clean. But some of the other ones have come out particularly bad. I mean, that base envelope one, for example, that was particularly, that was kind of hairy. But that's actually
It's really similar.
notoriously difficult. It's sort of early typeface is actually really, really, really hard. For whatever reason, I don't know why.
Because they use Fs for S's.
I mean,
weird things
but
like
that would be easy, right? You just tell it to recognize certain characters
It's never
differently.
turn it into an F.
Right,
The
that's
interesting
fun.
thing is it's
Um,
registering.
But
this
again, a
as
tesseract and
Yeah.
not this.
a bunch
Sure.
of spaces.
Well, but even, I
It's
mean,
like, oh, this
again,
is
if you had back-end access on this, you
Yeah.
could
They're
do
like, no, it's just one
We don't have
space.
Nobody
It's
gives me
easy.
back-end access
Is it
to
one
anything.
space?
That'd be too dangerous.
Yeah.
On that?
But
or-
it's,
Yeah, it is.
It's
But
it's
when
always
it goes to
interesting
work,
that
it counts as
those
5
formal
or
documents are
something.
actually one of the
Isn't
more
that strange?
complicated ones
I just wanted
to do. It's
Yeah.
what is
That's
it?
really interesting to me.
It's
I don't know.
18th century.
Super
It's
cool.
18th century type. It's for whatever reason really difficult. I don't know why, but it's coded there. Anyway, if no one else wants to play with it or see if I can get the scanner working, thank you for your time.
I'm gonna,
Thank you very much for
Yeah.
getting it.
yeah, very cool.
Thanks. Yeah, but if you have any questions, I'll be around, and I'm in the tech lab pretty frequently, and I tend to gab a bit, so if you want to talk about something related to DH or OCR or digital libraries, I will be more than happy to talk about it. So yeah, thank you for your time. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks, Tim.
I kind of want to get this to work.
Like I said, nothing's up here.
Yeah, I know. I tried.
Time passes.
Do you want me to save this PDF, Jana? Are you playing with it still?
No, I might come back to it at some point, but today I'm going to go
All right.
and attempt to communicate with things that do my job.
That's fair. All right. Well, then I'm gonna log out here. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to. I mean, I probably realistically won't ever invest the time learning how to use Tesseract, but I really
So
like the
I
idea.
actually, it's
Hi.
actually a summer project for me. Is
Yeah.
that I want to do it. So if you want to hang out with me and we want to work on it together, I'm
That'd
totally.
actually be, I'd be,
Because you're in the summer, you're in the city.
I'll be here.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
So that's something I specifically want to do. Oh
Yeah.
yes, the last slide, manual cleanup, which contains the bit about how your brain is better at recognizing the textual errors. But yes, manual cleanup, everyone's favorite part of OCR.
Plus ça change, plus c'est la même